All right. Hello. Thank you for coming tonight, AES. This is Matthew Andrew, and this is Effective Creativity, how to make the most of a creative mind. Take it away.
Thank you, Jena.
Once or twice I take a walk with you. I like to walk with you, and then I feel like I can fly away, away in my mind. And in my mind I try to find a way to talk to you, but it seems to be too hard. So sometimes I just need to take a step back and just simplify. Yeah, I need to simplify. I need to simplify. I need to simplify my life. I need to simplify my life. I need to simplify my life.
How's it going? So first of all, thank you to Jena and thank you to the Audio Engineering Society for having me. It's great to be back at my alma mater. It wasn't more than 4 or 5 years ago that I left to hit what they would call the real world, but who knows. So first thing I want to do tonight is ask a couple of questions. So who here in Audio Engineering Society, or if you're a guest, if you're visiting, who here makes music at all, in any way, makes music, okay? Who here plays music in any way? Who does video? Who does some video, any video production? As of today, yeah? New learning, aspiring? Okay, who considers themselves an artist? Who in this room considers themselves an artist? Who in this room considers themselves a critic? A critic, anyone? Okay, who in this room considers themselves creative? You consider yourself creative? Okay. Did anyone not raise your hand? Not to put you on the spot. So I have spent I have spent the last couple of years traveling around talking to artists, learning a lot of the back end of how shows and how recordings and how systems are run. I spent a lot of time around gear, and the main thing is I've just spent a lot of time listening. And I don't really pretend to have any sort of knowledge that anyone doesn't have. I just like to present my perspective on what I've found. So the first thing is there is no rules to creativity. So I'm going to talk about a lot of things tonight, and I'm going to talk about a lot of techniques. The first one being breaking things down. So I talked about creativity. I asked about creativity. When we talk about creativity and being creative, the goal most of the time is to get better at something while producing a product, right? And whether that product is a show, a performance, a recording, a CD, a video, whatever it is, even if that product is, I guess, your instrumentalism, your skill, still a product that you're producing. So the big thing I want to talk about tonight, talking about effective creativity, is how you can use the number one tool that you have to make sure that you can be most effective as creative people. And this doesn't just apply to music. This applies to art and everything else. But the big thing is we want to start to break down all of these really complicated, large ideas that we have before we start to approach this. So the first idea I want to break down is creativity. And creativity, as far as I see it, has two main parts to it. The first part is inspiration, and the second part is craft. So inspiration, the way that I see it, is the output of your mind. Now that might sound a little bit weird because usually we think of inspiration as an input. But if inspiration is the output of your mind, what you then do with that inspiration is what becomes uniquely you. So having your inspiration as the output of your mind is a new perspective. And it doesn't matter what kind of inputs you have. You can have an input of cartoons and YouTube and video games, and then all of that will coalesce into your inspiration, which then creates your creativity. But what I've found is that inspiration, for people who consider themselves creative, is usually not the issue. Usually the issue is the craft, which is the second part of it, because the craft and you learning how to manage both your inspiration and your craft at the same time, keep both animals well fed and well exercised, tends to be the challenge. So when we talk about creativity, there's another way to break it down, and that's creativity from the outside. Many of you, or some of you, said that you consider yourselves critics, right? When you consider something creative, when you assign something a creative value, there are two things that I think that has. And I think that creativity, when you describe it from an objective point, is this creative or is this not creative? It either has to have some sort of uniqueness, it has to have some sort of identity separate from other things that have existed, whether that's a new perspective or a new product altogether, and it also has to be relevant. Because if you're making amazing, wonderful things that is in a completely different language and in time signatures that no one can understand, then it's not going to be as creative. And so to me, I think that the most creative thing is to figure out how to approach whatever it is your considered demographic is. And don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against odd time signatures. It's fantastic. It doesn't really work well on a looper because subdivisions in 7 and 5 end up being really strange. But at the same time, I've also seen that anything other than 3 and 4 doesn't necessarily work on a dance floor. I also spend a lot of time as a DJ. I forgot to ask, who in here is a DJ? Or who in here has DJ'd, I should say? Okay, a few more hands. It's kind of becoming the stepchild of the music industry. But there's nothing wrong with that. I think DJs are a really interesting perspective, and there's a lot of things you can learn from DJing. And I recommend, honestly, that everyone do it because it's not super hard to get into. So, okay, so creativity. Let's break this down a little bit. How to be effective creatively, how to use your mind in order to make the most of what you're going to do creatively. What is the way to get better at something? Can anyone tell me? Practice. Okay. And how do we practice? The old adage is practice, practice, practice. I've met a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot, I've met a few people who will say that they practice for 8 and 9 hours a day. That sounds like a lot of time to practice, and I don't have that kind of time. And I'm assuming that most of us don't have that kind of time. But if you're practicing 8 and 9 hours a day, in my opinion, it's less about it's less about how much you're practicing and what kind of practicing you're doing. So using the same exercise that we did before of breaking something down into small pieces, I'm gonna give you a little story, a little adage about how I look at practice. So as an artist on your journey through life, as a creative on your journey through life, practice starts with you observing some kind of technique. And this can be an introspective observation where you think of something and go, oh, I really want to learn how to do that. Or it could be an external observation where you see someone and you go, oh, I really want to learn how to do that, right? So as you're creative, you find out what that technique is and you observe it. You observe it so much as like you're gonna like chop it down with a tree, chop it down with an axe so you can take it home and drag this tree back home to your studio. And once you have this technique in your studio and you say, I want to learn that, in order to practice it, in order to get better, you break it down. You break it down into the absolute smallest pieces possible. When anyone starts practicing, who here says they're gonna practice for more than an hour at a time? Okay. Who here says they're gonna practice for more than half hour at a time? Okay. That's usually the buy-in is about half an hour. From what I've found, anything that is longer than about 15 minutes, I lose interest real quick. And that's just me. I don't know if I'm sure there are other people more gifted and more dedicated to their craft than I am, but what I've found is when I talk about practice, I break down a technique, just like that log I've dragged into my studio. I'm gonna break it down into as many tiny little pieces as possible until it's the smallest little piece of something. So whether you're learning a lick, or whether you're learning a chord voicing, or you're learning a song, or you're learning a new recording technique, or you're learning a new piece of gear, all of it, you wanna break it down into the absolute smallest technique. Then you wanna ante in. I don't know if this is a gambling town, I guess everyone here should know what ante is, right? Ante in means you're gonna buy in 2 to 5 minutes to practice that technique. That's it. 2 to 5 minutes, I'm gonna learn this tiny little piece and I'm gonna get a little bit better at it. And then once you do that, put it on your workbench, 2 to 5 minutes until you either are done with that technique, meaning you don't wanna do it anymore, or until you start playing. And then you can take that technique and throw it in your bag, right? And repeat. So when you say you practice for half an hour, is this ringing a bell for anyone in your half-hour practice? Do you practice more than one thing? Or do you usually sit down and practice one thing for half an hour? Or do you go through one whole song many, many times in half an hour, right? So the big thing is when you're breaking down practice, you want to break things down into the smallest pieces possible. You want to ante in 2 to 5 minutes. And then you want to, until you play, and then you want to repeat that until you're done or until you start playing. And this brings us to the next definition, which is playing. And playing to me is as if you took that bag full of all the tricks that you've practiced and you dump it out on the table and you start to string it together in weird and interesting ways. Because to me, that also seems to be the most effective way to use a brain, where I can memorize a lot of tiny little things, and then finding interesting and creative ways to weave them together and in and out of each other ends up working really well. So playing is the other important part of this, and playing is the part why we get into doing this stuff. We play because it's fun. We play because that's the enjoyable part of it, right? We play because, well, you play video games. You play games as a kid. You just play stuff. That's what you do. That's how we learn. That's how we progress. So playing to me is a completely separate exercise from practicing. And I think this is the first distinction we need to make when we talk about getting better at something, especially something creative, is we need to separate the play from the practice. Now, the next step of this, if all you're looking to do is play, then that's fine. But if you are trying to play out, if you're trying to make money, if you're trying to make a product, if you're trying to do something, ending with playing usually won't get you very far. You can sometimes find a venue that will just let you play, but usually you need to find some way to perform. And so this brings us to rehearsal, which is the next step of this. And rehearsal comes for more practiced musicians, not necessarily practice, I should say. Rehearsal comes when your goal is a performance. And whether that performance is lighting design for a rock show, lighting design for a theater show, or whether it's DJing or music production or live looping or music production in the studio, that's a performance as well, right? And so rehearsing those processes is super important. So the next thing I want to talk about has to do with instrument design. And so I'm going to do another little demonstration of what this silly machine does. And then I will explain a little bit about it and why I chose the things I did. But for now, let me see if I can just play. So I'm going to actually veer a little bit from my plan here. We'll talk more about what I was going to talk about, but I'm feeling called to talk about something else. So recently, I went through a lot of different mentors, looking for someone who would guide me in the direction that I wanted to. And if there's something that I can encourage any of you to do, or something that I will encourage every one of you to do, is to find some kind of mentor. Whether that be a mentor in a book, a mentor in video, or a mentor in actual people. But the big thing is I've went through a number of different mentors, and due to my uncertainty, I started working a lot on what I thought would be my creativity and what a lot would be my my fuel. So I guess this does bridge into what I was going to talk about. So another thing we want to do at all times as creative beings is constantly fuel our inspiration, right? Constantly give us input, or good input, that will give us good inspiration, that will keep us creating stuff and keep us energized and excited about the things that we're doing. So what I did was I invested a lot of money and a lot of time in building up a studio where I could sit down and create music and then go market myself as a DJ. And I really started to follow guys like Calvin Harris and Armin van Buuren, and really wanted to do that. And the problem is I would sit down with all my expensive gear, behind my expensive studio monitors, to create a track, and nothing would come out. Previous to this, and this is actually probably the 5th or 6th iteration of this silly looping machine that I've built. And I've used a number of different pieces of gear, toured with it, and I've never had more fun playing music than sitting behind a looper. Any of you who are in Audio Engineering Society do some kind of recording, yes? Yeah? Okay. If you want to play a recording device like an instrument, that's what a looper is. And I highly, highly recommend that anyone who's interested in recording and also playing music does some kind of live looping, because it just is a way to expand your creativity. Sorry, so let me come back to the main topic we were talking about. So the next part of creativity, we talked about creativity and what is creativity, both from an objective standpoint and from the, I guess, the seed standpoint of like being creative, how to be creative. But then we talked about rehearsal, then we talked about practice, and we talked about practice, play, rehearsal, and performance. So the next part is preparing your instrument. And preparing your instrument, if you're, say, for example, a guitar player, can be something as simple as tuning your guitar. If you know how to tune a guitar, you can pretty much play most guitars, but there's many, many more things you need to do to that instrument to get it to play properly. You need to give it the proper intonation, which means you're actually tuning the distance the strings are apart at their widest to make sure that all of the frets play the correct intonation or the correct tone, so that all they're in tune with each other. It's not just the strings. You also need to worry about the string action, so how far away or close to the fretboard your strings are, because if they're too close, they'll vibrate. If they're too far away, it's too hard to play. Well, that's a lot of personal preference, and it also depends on what your goal is. But the idea being here, the guitar only has 6 strings, and you still have people who have spent their entire lifetimes learning how to set up a guitar properly. So what a luthier is, that's what they do, and it's really an art form, setting up the guitar, much less playing it. And when we talk about now, with modern recording, with computers, with keyboards now not just being a piano, you now have unlimited possibilities. And so when I talk about me spending a lot of time and money investing in sitting down to create music in front of a computer screen, I opened myself up to every single possibility. And I broke what would, philosopher, 80-20 principle, Bernoulli's The Flight thing. Anyway, the 80-20 principle, which I don't know if you've ever heard it, is 80% of hassle goes into producing the last 20% of the results. So that means that you spend most of your effort in just trying to get the last 20% of the results. And I find that this is a constant sliding scale. So there's such a thing as, taking away too much of it. If you take away 80% and 80% and 80%, you're left with 1%. You have nothing left, right? So when I was sitting down in front of a computer to make music, I realized that I'd opened myself up to the possibility, and I'd also spent 90% of the work just achieving the last 20 or 10% of polish that I was getting out of the tracks I was producing. And I was losing every single part of why I started making music in the first place. So 2 years ago, I was working at the Guitar Center in San Francisco, homeless, with a battery-powered sound system and enough effects pedals to do this on the street. And I was trying to make some sort of semblance of living to make that happen, but it didn't matter. I was having so much fun doing what I was doing that at the end of the day, no matter what couch I was crashing on, it was awesome. And then once I met the mentor who first started to guide me in the direction of, well, let's figure out how to market this. Let's figure out how to make this into a business. Let's figure out how you can be a professional musician rather than a homeless musician. So what I learned is that the most important thing is feeding your inspiration and feeding your creativity, because producing the product, not marketing the product, but producing the product is the most important part. Because I was learning a lot about marketing, and I was learning a lot about networking, and I was learning a lot about just meeting people and how to, once you have a product, to sell it, but I had lost all inspiration to produce the product in the first place. Anyway, sorry for that. So let me digress again. So back to designing your instrument. So I want to tell you a little bit about this instrument and what I'm doing here. So one of the things I really enjoy about live looping, and especially watching people do improvisational live looping, is that you learn or you get insight into someone's creative process. Now, I have no pretension about the music that comes out of this machine. I know that it can use a lot of mixing. I know that it could use a lot of polish. I know that it could, we could multi-track it. And then all of a sudden we could apply, put it through 32 channels of an SSL console. I know that we could use much more expensive gear and that we could use a much better keyboard. And I know that we could really spend a lot of time in a studio retracking those vocal parts because most of them weren't in tune and half of them weren't on time, right? But the point is I'm eliminating that 80% of the hassle that still yields, that only yields the 20% of the result. Because all of a sudden I'm producing more music because I'm feeding my inspiration by writing more songs. Now, as far as producing any of this, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could play it as a show. I like talking to people more than I like playing a DJ set. And when you start to actually write songs that you have to perform, to me that gets really stale, but I get bored quickly. I know a lot of singer-songwriters who absolutely love what they do, and there's nothing against that. Something about walking up on stage with just a guitar and your voice and not worrying about all this stuff, it's really magical. So, feeding your inspiration, how do we feed your inspiration, right? How do we keep motivated? How do we do this? The biggest thing is you can't weigh yourself down. And again, let's kind of break this down. So what is your inspiration? If your inspiration is the output of your mind, that means that inspiration is constantly exercising your brain. I don't know if you know this, but every day you wake up with a specific mental capacity, a specific limit of mental processing power. Different from a computer that just gets power from the wall and the processor can constantly run, you have a limit every day. And of course it's based on nutrition, it's based on the amount of sleep you get, it's based on a number of different factors. But if inspiration is the output of your mind, staying inspired and finding inspiration is exhausting. And this is where I will encourage you to design your input, or whatever is feeding your inspiration, very, very carefully. There's an old adage, garbage in, garbage out, that definitely applies. I would say, from what I've seen, those who spend time doing really interesting and unique things and around really interesting and unique people, do really interesting and unique things. Maybe not, though. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, all of you are interesting and unique people, so I'm really glad to be here. Because I'm learning from all of you as I'm speaking. The other thing is, in order to feed your inspiration, I think the main thing is sleep. And I say this more as like a personal, like, if there's one thing I could tell my college self, get more sleep. You're probably not sleeping enough, and if you sleep, you'll be faster. If you sleep, you'll be able to do those things with more accuracy and with more coordination. If you sleep more, it'll just help you. But you miss out on the parties, and sometimes that's more important. So, yeah, I want to go ahead and open this up to questions. And I want to open this up to as broad of a question as you have, especially because I don't carry the, I don't know, I guess what you would call it. I don't carry any, I don't walk in here with a reputation. So this can be as broad as whatever, but anything that you're facing in your creative life that's either a positive story that you want to celebrate or something that you need help with or that you just want some advice on or that you just want to talk about. Does anyone have any questions?
How do you go about promotion?
Promotion is a great question. So the first thing to do, and this is actually, I will quote John Mayer in saying this, the first way to promote your music is to have great music. If you have an excellent product, the promotion will do itself. If you write amazing songs, the promotion will, people will latch onto that and say, man, come with me and see what I've got to show you. This guy is amazing, right? So that's the first step. But the second step is, for promotion, especially when you're talking about entering into the realm of production, is get emails. Get emails. Facebook is important and Instagram is important for building an online personality. A lot of people say that, but I say slim that down to as simple of a process as possible and get emails. All I did was I started a Google form, which is kind of like a spreadsheet. Well, it fills a spreadsheet. So I can basically send someone a link. They put in their email, what they're interested in, and their phone number and their name and their zip code. And then it populates a spreadsheet. And so I've got a spreadsheet of everyone for the past 5-10 years that has said they were interested in what I was doing. I even have a shortcut saved on my phone so that I can just say, here, put in your information, and then all of a sudden, when I send out an email, which is super infrequent because I don't perform very often, you'll get it and go, oh, he's still performing. And that way also, because of the zip code, I'm not sending someone in Berkeley where I was performing stuff about performances I'm doing here. I mean, close friends I'll still do, and maybe they'll get word and come travel for me. That's the goal, I guess, right? So promotion, first about the product, right? Second about emails, and I guess to break down and actually define what that is, it's the shortest distance communication between you and the person. When someone's looking at their email, it's their email. When someone's looking at Facebook, it's your message buried under all of this other stuff that they have to deal with. And so if you have their email, it's going to make everything easier. It's going to make that communication. And I will say this too, if you have people's email, don't treat it like a Facebook or an Instagram. Tom Gordon. Don't treat it like a Facebook or an Instagram. Don't abuse people's email because they'll treat it as spam and get rid of it. So, send some people an email only when it's relevant and important to them. But that what I say would be the first thing of building a network. Because initially, once you start to hit the ground running, you have the product, or at least the inkling of a product, because there's no sense in hitting the ground if you don't have a product. Let me step back. So there's no sense in not trying to do what you have when you're almost to the product, right? Not trying to promote what you have when you're not 100% developed. That's totally fine and awesome and recommended. So the biggest thing about building your email list and your network up front is that you're also going to gain allies up front. You're going to gain people who go, oh, hey man, I was working on this logo because I was thinking about you over the weekend. Here it is. I know businesses that are really successful that their logos came from for free from people who just said, oh yeah, I was thinking about you, here's a logo. It happens a lot, right? Soliciting someone to make your logo is usually a really expensive and time-consuming process. But same thing. So it's the same way you meet managers and other producers, co-producers, recording engineers, anyone. You build a network of email like that. Yeah? Cool. Yeah.
So I find that when I'm making music, most of the time my inspiration is fed by if I'm working with other people. And I
Mhm.
feed off their ideas and we bounce ideas off each other and we create these great products. But whenever I try to make music myself, like just by myself, I'm never really quite happy with what I'm coming out with.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried doing stuff like looping before, and it's, you know, I enjoy it, but it's still doesn't come out with like a finished project that I want to show people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So do you have any suggestions for sort of recreating that just link between other people when you're creating?
Sure. Yeah. So collaboration, working with people, and not just talking about music, not just talking about playing with people. So I think as a side step, there's a really interesting dynamic when you improvise with someone in the room, musically. I think it's a unique experience that, I mean, I guess you could improvise like an acting improvisation with someone in the room, and it's a similar kind of aesthetic. But there's something about an unspoken language, an undefined language like music, where you're communicating really in sounds that can portray emotion. I think it's really interesting. So to say that you get inspired by working with people, absolutely, that's fantastic. I would say, especially if you're feeling uninspired by yourself, a couple of things. First thing, start a band, right?
Got one.
Yeah, exactly. Find someone else to work with and write with and do that. But the other thing is I would apply the same, like, breaking it down exercise to why do you get stuff from other people? Now, of course, you can analyze it. There's the that experiment, I think there was a TED Talk someone did where they brought a cow up on stage and they said, okay, everyone tweet what you think the weight is. And so 1,000 people in the room tweeted in their guess of what the weight of the cow was. And when they averaged everyone's guesses, it ended up being exactly right. So there's something about the combined intelligence of people being kind of this super intelligence, and this, you know, 2 people are smarter than 1, basically, is the simplest way to define it, and 3 people are smarter than 2. So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that you're all of a sudden getting surprise input to your inspiration. So one thing that I've been experimenting with, and I can't tell you if this works or not, but it's just a fun way to do it, is the place that I work plays a lot of what I would consider D or C list music all day long. It's really just like circling in my head. It's all of this music that I probably would never listen to if I ever walked out of there. And I like pop music, don't get me wrong. It's not pop music. It's just that it's like this, it's like that pop music that you kind of heard one time and went, oh, okay, yeah, but I don't think that's going to be a hit. Like, that's all the songs they play. So what I've been really experimenting with is like giving myself shotgun bursts of different songs. So I'll go to the radio and I'll just jam through and find something I like, but not listen to it for more than 15 seconds and then go to something else, right? Same thing with even video, because visual stimulus to me is really powerful. I'm kind of a very visual person. So I'll go through, I'll just YouTube playlists. And YouTube does this really cool thing now where it gives you the next video recommended, but just skip through things and jump through them quickly. And then all of a sudden you give yourself a lot of different visual stimulus. And especially if you start with something like a TED Talk, or you start with something like some Harvard lecture or something, you can get a lot of really interesting and unique inputs, or, jazz players or improvisational music. If you start with kitten videos, I'm sure you're not gonna get much inspiration from that, but maybe you will, it's up to you and what feeds your inspiration. The other thing, like I mentioned at the beginning, there is no rule for everybody. There isn't one thing that works for every single person, so it's important to kind of experiment with that. And so I would say for you to find that personal inspiration, The other thing that it sounds to me, and this is just from an outsider's perspective, whenever I've gotten to that point of like, I just hate what I'm doing, and I don't know if that's what's happening with you, but that can happen where you sit down and you just go, I've invested so much time and effort into this and I just don't like it. Learning and practicing to release what you've created before you create it, release your attachment to the result, I should say, is one of the most important things you can do as an artist. To say, I'm gonna blow into this horn and allow what comes out to just come out. Because you can't fix what had already been played. You can only get better and practice your craft and improve and make it better next time. And you know how to do that, and the way to do that is not by worrying about what you already played, right? So it's like this weird vicious cycle where you're constantly analyzing what you're playing while you're doing it, and it's about putting that analyst to sleep. It's about saying, there's a time for a backseat for you. I know my muscle memory, I know, and this is the best way to tackle nerves oftentimes too, is to just to do it, right? To put that guy to sleep and to just do what you know you've done. To take your bag and just dump it out and just do it. Because if you wait and worry and like you take every piece out, you like look at it and do it this way, okay, do this, you're not gonna produce the product, you're not gonna give everyone everything you have, it's just gonna get stuck. So anyway, that's what I have. Next question. I see someone, yeah?
Okay, so you've been in the real world for a while. Right?
the real world, yes.
A few things about the industry and what you do. So what is the most important thing, or maybe the two most important things that you would tell yourself our age, like as you were preparing to be where you are now?
Well, oh boy, that's a good, okay. So if I was, okay, because I went through like 3 stages when I was in college. I went through the stage where I was really trying to be an electrical engineer. Then I went through the stage where I was really trying to be a rock star, which Tom Gordon could tell you all about. Then I went through the stage where I was really trying to learn about myself and what was going on in the world. So I would say myself entering college, what I would tell myself is do what you enjoy and learn what you enjoy. I would say to the rock star part of me, do you really think you're going to be the top 98% of what you're doing? If not, find what you can be in the top 98% of what you're doing, because that's going to be most important. Now that oftentimes kills a lot of spirits in a room, but don't let it. That, to say, I know I can be the top 98% of people in the world in something, and you don't have to be 98, 95, whatever. If you want to be in the top 5th percentile of people in something, figure out what that is. And if that's not what it is that you're doing, it's important to be honest with yourself. It doesn't mean what you can do that you're in the top 5% is far off. And these days, there's so many obscure things that you can get into that there's not many people doing stuff. You can honestly be the only one doing something a lot of the time. So, but that's the thing I would tell my rock star self. The third thing, as I was leaving college, as I was finishing what I was doing and graduating, which I guess I should say a little bit of this, I think I'm, and you might be able to correct me on this, I think I'm the only graduate from University of Nevada, Reno with a degree in audio engineering.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, so I'm the only one who's ever done that. It's through the general studies program, but they let you design your own degree, and you write your thesis, and you basically say why each of the classes you took was relevant to what you wanted to learn.
I forgot you did that.
Yeah, and so I mean, if there's anything to tell myself then, I think that's when I really had it put together. I mean, I don't know, I didn't have it put together, never have it put together, but like, I don't know if there's anything I would need to tell myself, because that was, I guess, some of my fondest memories, but that's that. Okay, next question.
You have one.
Did you have a question?
Just a comment. I'll be joining you there in a couple of years.
Oh, yeah.
General studies.
Yeah. Well, in general studies, I can tell you this. The amount of times that I've had someone look at me and say, you have a general studies degree, can't even count on one hand. Hasn't happened. I have a degree from the University of Nevada, Reno with a focus in audio engineering. And I'm absolutely proud of that. And if they ask how and why and what specific department it came out of, I'm proud to say that it came out of the General Studies department. I think that sometimes, I don't know why the General Studies department was created. I can't answer for that. But what I can tell you is it exists and you can use it however you want to use it. And so that's what I ended up doing. Yes.
So, congratulations on being a daddy, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I haven't seen you since that happened.
Yeah, twice
So,
now.
There is an incredibly high divorce rate in this industry,
Huh.
and a lot of broken families in our industry.
Uh-huh.
And you are married, and you have a family, and you're making that work. How do you balance the work and the family?
I should repeat the question for you, Mike.
Yeah, so the question is, how do I balance work and family? It was said that there's a lot of divorce in the music industry, I guess creative industries, media industry. So one of the things I'm most proud of is my relationship with my wife and my relationship with my kids. And I think the thing I can say, if there's one way to do it, it's effective use of the 80-20 principle of I'm going to eliminate 80% of the time and hassle I spend on this so that I have that time to spend with the people I care most about. And that's part of the reason why I do looping and part of the reason why I didn't like sitting down producing music behind a computer. And I say producing, of course, is a definition that we all argue about now because a record producer is different from someone who produces music now, but it's the same. So what I mean is sitting down, making music on a computer, mouse and keyboard, sometimes this keyboard, it was taking so much time to get to what's the equivalent of this result. Whereas this takes me no more time to make the music than it does to listen to it, which is why I do this instead. So to answer your question, it's figure out what's important. I was fortunate enough to meet my best friend in the world and propose to her the night we met. She said no, like 3 times for the next like 3 or 4 years. But when we finally got married, I knew I was going to be together with her forever. So that's also part of it is if you can meet the person that you know you can be best friends with forever, just do that. It's easy, right? Okay.
All right, so let's say you get your project started and you work on it and keep working on it. How do you figure out when you're done with it? Like, how do you figure out like when you're not adding anything useful anymore?
That's a great question. Anyone who has made music, especially made music on a computer, knows there is no end to what you can do to a track. There is no end to the amount of plugins, the amount of resampling, reprocessing, mastering, fine-tuning, remastering, resampling, recycling. There's no end to what you can do. Michael Gott was one of my early music mentors, and he's a musician in the New Thought movement. He told me that recording to him is a snapshot of his musical moment in time. And so what I would say, and what I think has been really good practice for me, is to spend as little time as possible on a track. Because, again, you're going to spend we've all had that moment where you have a good idea, and you feel it, and you're in the zone, and you make it, and at the end of half an hour, you have a track. Or you have a song that you like, that you wrote. You have something, and it's like, that just gelled, and you're in the moment, and it's awesome. Doesn't always happen, and so then you want to build the album around that, and then building the next 9 tracks is usually the challenge. That's where you're like, drudging a weight through the mud. So what I would say, minimize the time you spend on a track, and again, don't be attached to the result. The other thing is I would say spend time learning every aspect of finishing a track. So especially, are you talking about like music production? Like making music or?
For me, it's specifically composition and production, but...
Composition and production. So is your finished product a written piece of music?
In theory, yes.
In theory, okay, it's a written piece of music. So I mean, that's kind of a different paradigm because there is slightly lower limits than, but not really. I mean, there's 88 notes on a piano and people still haven't found the end of that instrument, right? And so then you have an entire orchestra with all of its idiosyncrasies. So I would say this. The biggest thing is to figure out what is the right, figure out the point right before you get tired of it, and then just hit print. Doesn't matter if it's unfinished, doesn't matter if it's 30 seconds long, doesn't matter if it's anything. Hit print, and then move on to the next one. The reason why is twofold. First one is because there's plenty of brilliant, unfinished, and short works out there. And there's nothing wrong with having a lot of those. The second thing is practicing a track, and I say track, a piece from start to finish, a performance from start to finish, and all of its aspects. Practicing all of its aspects to fit within my definitions of what practicing is the most important part. For example, I think producers, and I have most of my experience with music producers, and I think a lot of this might apply, but most music producers have the most experience in sequencing a beat and making a beat. 4 bars, 8 bars, whatever. That's where they stop. But when you talk about finishing a track, you haven't even entered into mixing, into sound design really at all. I mean, sometimes there's a little sound design involved in the initial inception process, but into mixing, into mastering, and into printing and releasing. And so all of those are also individual aspects of what needs to be practiced. And so like I say, find a place right before you get bored of it and print it. Specifically print it and practice releasing it. Now you can release it privately if it's not something you're super duper proud of. I have a ton of private YouTube videos. But that way you are finishing the cycle, you are practicing, you're creating neural pathways in your brain because you're continually doing that thing over and over again. But that way, when you hit that thing that you're like, this is the one, you know exactly what to do with it at the end of the cycle, right? I fell into that a lot with making music on a computer too, where I spent the first 3 or 4 years doing what I was doing, getting up to the point where I was about to mix the track, and then someone would distract me and I'd ask another question and do this thing, and then I wouldn't finish mixing, mastering, and releasing the track. And it wasn't until very recently that I figured out how to master my own works and mix my own works. And again, I'm not a master at mastering or a master at mixing, but it's loud. Okay, any other questions? I think we've got time for a couple more. Anything else? Yeah.
Well, you said you don't necessarily like trying to sit down and just create something out of nothing, but when you did that, was there anything that you found that helped other than doing this? Like, was there something that didn't make you feel stuck?
Yeah, moving quickly. I mean, again, there's nothing faster than producing the music at the pace you're hearing it. I guess possibly making music faster than you could listen to it, but that would be a really interesting exercise.
If I sit down, I try to write something, and I get there, and I'm like, okay, what am I going to write? I just sit there.
So, and are you specifically talking on a computer?
Not specifically, no. Just like in general.
Okay, so let's just talk like on a keyboard. So oftentimes what I'll do when I'm writing music, especially from inception, if I don't have any kind of inspiration, which, I mean, if I don't have any kind of input that's giving me inspiration, and I'm just kind of trying to generate something, it's very difficult to do. But what I'll usually do is I'll sit with like a sequence. And so you can even do like a metronome. Like in my case, I'll use the looper. So here, let me just blank this. I think there's a metronome on this looper, but I don't know how to use it. So that's off. So something like this, like I won't even use effects or anything. This is just gonna be like an exercise. So it's just gonna be like let's say I'm trying to write, and this really helps, especially when you're trying to write to a specific genre or to a specific BPM or feel. So like give yourself a little groove or a little feel, and it can be a drum loop or a metronome or whatever you think is gonna work. I have, when I'm writing like piano singer-songwriter stuff, I have one of those little like weighted $6 metronomes. It's probably not accurate at all, but just to give me a reference to tempo so that I can have something to groove into. So yeah, just something like if we, okay, so just something like this. And so, again, this is why I perform with this thing, not because I think that the product that it's producing is particularly fantastic or amazing, but because I think it's a great demonstration of how my creative process works, because I've trimmed a lot of the fat, having to, because I don't have 40 minutes to produce one song for you here, right? Or 2 hours, 6 hours to produce one song. So usually then what I'll start with is something like, so I've got this groove, okay. I didn't like that note, so. I like that one better. I don't like any of these. Let's try again. So, just start over. So, the big thing is to put your hands on keys, or in the case of like writing something, composing something, is to just put stuff in there. Like draw stuff in, especially draw stuff in that you haven't seen before, move stuff around. The other thing that I found that really helps a lot, what platform are you doing this on?
Just totally getting like brand new.
Okay.
I'm getting stuck. So
What are you using?
nothing. I'm just trying to.
Oh, you're writing. So
Writing.
Do you have a guitar?
No, more like lyric wise.
Lyric-wise, okay. Try things. So the big thing is if you're talking about something lyric-wise, vocally, I guess I don't need to sing like that, but I can. So vocally is like, especially when you're talking about words. And wordplay is an interesting exercise too. I had a good friend of mine from Chicago, or a guy I met from Chicago, give me a really interesting freestyle lesson. And if I could duplicate it, and I wish I had recorded it, it seriously was he freestyled a freestyle lesson, and it was the most amazing experience I've ever had. And for the next 3 months, I could freestyle, and it was great. And since then, I've stopped practicing, and it just, it's kind of gone away. But basically, especially when you're talking about lyrically, are you writing songs for like pop music, or are you writing songs for like the classical jazz with a soft J, the classical jazz sort of audience?
I'd probably lean more towards pop.
Lean more towards pop, okay. So the pop is a science too. So I recommend looking up like how-to songwriting on YouTube. And I take that back. I recommend finding people who are really good songwriters, like people who write hits and know how to write hits. Boy, I wish I had some names for you. But yeah, look up that, because that's all free material of like, John Mayer does a great workshop about, he was at Berkeley and he did a whole thing at Berkeley, and there's 2 other like industry songwriters who actually now teach about songwriting. There are rules. So like with pop music, you want to invite the listener in by using you, or we, or us, or some kind of direct pronoun. So you're not saying, I do this and I do that. You're saying, I do this with you, right? All of a sudden it invites the listener in to be part of the story. So that's the first rule of pop songwriting. So always make sure to keep that in mind. So some point in time you need to include the lyric you, or us, or we. The other thing about songwriting is you need to get to your chorus within 30 seconds, which means you don't have to say much. You don't have much time to say it. The other thing is use shorter words, because long words, and don't get me wrong, there are exceptions to all of these rules, but shorter words, especially monosyllabics, tend to work better in pop, right? So even something as simple as, like let's just say one note, same groove. Okay, so if I'm like, and we can think of something like, I don't know why, but every time I go to think of a new topic, it's always food. So I need to always go like one step further. So it's like food, and then like, okay, around food, what are you doing? So like I'm thinking about a situation where I'm sitting and I'm gazing into someone's eyes and we're meeting about this situation. Like I'm really putting myself inside of a story. And it's something I'm just making up about food, right? So it's like this. So if I sit like something like groove, and we'll just let this loop groove. Something like,
Me and you lock eyes.
all one word syllables, right? Me and you lock eyes, right? That works, right? I don't know if I love that, right? So,
Like me and you lock eyes. Can't rid myself of this disguise.
okay, so that didn't fit in rhythm, so let me kind of lock it together like,
Me and you lock eyes. I'll rid myself of this disguise.
okay, I don't like those notes now, right? So it's just about like doing, like writing it, like just getting it out there and like, what's the E40, verbal vomit, just getting it out there, right? And like, then refining it. Yeah, Foudy. And then refining it. I've been in the Bay for the last year, so that's all been in my head. So that's basically it. I mean, the big thing is get started and like, just start building it. And the analogy I make is like, that kind of craft is like Legos, but it's important to have the right pieces. Because yeah, you can just put Legos together, but if you get the right colors and the right pieces and the right shapes, then you can build something that's really interesting and good, right? I'm a dad, so that's why the Legos are in my mind, but okay. All right, there's another question?
I have a question just on this, whenever you're using it there, using the vocal effects, what is that?
Yeah. Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about this. So each of these, well, okay, so I started wanting to do live looping as soon as I graduated from UNR. I really loved recording, and again, I wanted to use recording like an instrument, and I ran into a lot of videos of a guy named Beardy Man. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Beardy Man. He is insane and fantastic and impressive, and probably the world's leading live looper, and probably the guy who's invested the most into building a live looping rig. Beardy Man, you should all write it down and go watch his latest stuff. It's incredible, it'll blow your mind. And improvisationally, he's an incredible musician also, not to mention an incredible looper. So I was really inspired by Beardy Man, and the biggest thing I was inspired by is he was able to walk on stage with nothing pre-recorded and play an entire DJ-style set with nothing but his voice and some effects boxes. And this is a lot of his earlier work. He was using like some different loopers and stuff. And the part that was so cool about it was that not only was his songwriting cool, like with a looper like this, and I think where a lot of people hit the ceiling is, yeah, you can make music that sounds okay, but unless you have the effects and the processing and the studio tools, it's not going to sound anything close to a studio recording, right? Another guy that's really good is a guy named Dub Effects, and he does live looping like on the street, but he has like songs, and so he'll like actually perform his songs on a looper, which is really cool. Okay, so anyway, step back many years. I was also a huge fan of Ableton Live. Still am a huge fan of Ableton Live, I shouldn't say was, but I was really into using it and working with it. And so I built a big rig that used a computer and this keyboard and about 4 other controllers, and I was doing all this stuff, and it was crazy. And the result never ended up being as good as I wanted it to be. And so then through specific refinements, and then specifically being homeless in the Bay Area and needing to have something that was battery powered and super portable, I ended up with a similar effects box to this and a big 5-bank hardware looper. And that ended up being the simplest rig I've ever played with and one of the best ones, because the looper, I'm skipping ahead. Does everyone here know what a looper does? I mean, I've obviously been showing you, but like, okay, looper, the most important part of a looper is that you can just capture an idea. Mic stands. You can capture an idea and immediately groove on it. So my start of the recording and end of the recording, and I don't have anything in my ears right now, right? So I'm not listening to a metronome. The start of the recording and the end of the recording determines the tempo, right? So we could do something in 5. Right, so and I can, it basically the length of this loop now determines the tempo. And then every other loop I do beyond this can be like, I guess this is the easiest demonstration. So if I just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and then I can overdub 3 with something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. It's just 1 and 2 really 3 4 1 2 simple 3 performance targeted recorder. They started as like guitar effects pedals, and it started from a delay. It was a delay with no feedback or selectable, switchable feedback that would feed into it. Yeah, and they were big like rack machines that went into a mixer. If you look up some of the original live loopers, it's like a dude on a stage with like a 32-channel console and 100 different instruments around him, and he's like running around, like hitting buttons and recording and doing all this. So that's where that started, and that's what the looper is, and that was really the main focus of what I was doing. This looper I'm using is an app because the apps actually are faster. I don't know why. They have really good latency correction. They're faster and also a lot cheaper than buying the top-of-the-line looper at the time. So I use them. And for some reason, the people who are making hardware loopers don't understand the people who are using loopers. It's a really strange thing. Like, I don't want to nitpick about any specific company, but the looper that I was using like one small part of it, and all of the other stuff that it did was completely irrelevant to looping. And it was really, I don't know. Anyway, so that's why I use this, because it tends to be just a looper and slimmed down. The effects pedal I'm using is a Line 6 M13. I chose this effects pedal specifically, and this is the one I landed on after trying a Boss ME50B. It was a bass multi-effects pedal, so as far as the frequency response of the human voice, it's closer to a bass than it is to an electric guitar, because an electric guitar is really band limited. So the reason why I chose this one is because, and if you could see this, but you can't, if you could see this, each of these boxes has a separate set of 6 knobs. So essentially what this is this is 4 separate guitar-style stomp box effects pedals, right? And then I've got 3 choices for what I want each of those to be. Basically what this allows me to do is to grab any sort of effect. So like, this is a model of the LA2A tube compressor. It's really subtle, as compression should be. Then this is some crazy flanger, and this is a delay, and this is a crazy tube. But the cool part is that I have immediate control over what all this stuff does. And like, here's a nice subtle plate reverb. This is the one I usually use for just singing. Ooh, for just singing. Ooh, ah, ah. Let me turn off that flanger. Ooh, ah, ah. Reverb, right? But it's subtle. It's not like super intense, and my mix is at about like 15%. But it also allows me to do cool things like this. There's an octave down, and then I have 2 octaves down here. Too low. So that's what the effects pedal does. But that allows me to basically have my voice be a whole lot of different instrumentation. And then this keyboard is really just a Rhodes. Really just a Rhodes that tends to be lighter and cheaper, so works well. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. We have about 10 minutes left. So what I'd like to do is wrap up a little. The big takeaway from this, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, is that it's always important to simplify. It's always important to look at what you're doing and plan, well, not necessarily plan, but just look at what you're doing and decide what is the absolute most important thing to focus on, and focus on that one thing at a time. Because if you start to tackle everything at once, and this is, in the example of producing music or making music, it's, okay, I'm gonna write a great song, and I'm gonna mix it, I'm gonna master it, and I'm gonna produce it, and I'm gonna market it, and I'm gonna sell it, and I'm gonna perform it. focus on one thing at a time and simplify. And then once you have the product, if it's a good product, it'll sell. I mean, you have to sell it, but it'll sell. So that's that. Really, I don't know. It's always great to be back at UNR, really. Especially to see the secret caves that don't really exist. Okay. Let's do something at a different tempo. Let's try. Like that pan? Did you hear what I did there? That's a new toy. It's good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I found you. You saw me. And now we go. I like to see through you. And now we roll. And this is how I live. 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 Thank you. Tail sticks. Thank you, Ray.